Today is a terrible day for the Uyghur people, and the US is to blame. After decades-long struggles with terrorism, violence, and poverty, China's Xinjiang Uygur Autonomous Region finally started to see prosperity and quality of life improve in the past few years. But the US government does not want that and is determined to bring poverty, violence, and destabilisation back to the region. Today, the US enacted their most recent weapon, a new piece of legislation designed to hurt the Uyghur people. Let's get reporting. Hello, 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博然。Hey you guys, welcome back to Reports on China. I'm Andy. The US government does not care about the Uyghur people and instead sees them as a political tool to be played with. Today, the United States will begin enforcing a piece of legislation called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which literally labels all companies in Xinjiang as guilty of using slave labor and therefore restricts their import into the United States without clear and convincing evidence that no slave labor was used. What happened to innocent until proven guilty? But the most infuriating thing about this legislation is that it states as fact that China arbitrarily detained as many as 1.8 million ethnic minorities in a system of extrajudicial mass internment camps where they're subject to forced labor, torture, political indoctrination, and other severe human rights abuses. So what's the problem with this? Well, it's absolutely and utterly false, and there is absolutely not a single piece of credible evidence to back up any of these claims anywhere you look. If I could choose just one way to convince you that the US is making all this up, it would be this. Now, do you guys remember the so-called Uyghur Tribunal which took place in the UK last December? This tribunal was meant to provide, once and for all, convincing and startling evidence of mass human rights abuses going on in Xinjiang. The result? Not a single piece of evidence that could be administered in a court of law. In fact, the tribunal requested evidence from US Secretary of State Blinken, among others, that could back up their claims that mass human rights abuses were taking place in the region. And what happened? Blinken ignored their request and failed to supply a single piece of evidence. Now, why is that? Why would the US government not supply evidence to what was meant to be such an important hearing about the region? Well, the answer is very simple. Because it does not exist. Keep in mind that there are 1 billion with a B, smartphone users in China today, and not a single photo or video proving genocide or torture or slave labor in Xinjiang exists. Do you remember those hideous images we saw from Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay of the US undertaking mass human rights abuses? Well, surely if China really is interning 1 million or more Uyghurs and putting them through mass genocide or torture or slave labor programs, we'd have some evidence, right? It's not just the US government trying to destabilise Xinjiang and China in general. It's also their proxies like ASPI or the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International and the like, who have all released reports claiming mass human rights abuses with absolutely zero credible evidence and just a bunch of conjecture and poor analysis. ASPI released a comical report called Uyghurs for Sale, which has already been massively debunked by independent entities. In fact, it's been argued that ASPI took away the Uyghur people's human rights by removing their right to work after a number of international companies refused to hire them after their lie-riddled report was released. I did 2 videos on a recent report by Australian legal analyst Jack Jones, who absolutely and unequivocally tore ASPI's report apart from a legalistic standpoint. I really recommend you watch those videos, and I'll put the link in the description below. A scary note for anyone who's been to China anytime in the past, 10 years. One of ASPI's so-called experts is a man called Nathan Ruza, who tried to argue that this WeChat or Alipay QR payment code was some kind of arbitrary police identification tool. The only tool here is Nathan. So why is the US restricting the import of goods from Xinjiang? Because they want to destabilize the region and weaken China's progress, especially since Xinjiang is strategic to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is a massive program between China and more than 100 countries in the region that aims to develop and bring prosperity to the area. The US is not involved and wants to stop China's influence at any cost. Basically, the US knows that Xinjiang and the people who live there are finally seeing prosperity and quality of life after struggles with terrorism and poverty over the past few decades. There hasn't been a single terrorist attack in the region for 5 years, and Xinjiang officially lifted every single one of its people out of poverty in November 2020. Prosperity and quality of life, you see, do not bode well with violence, instability, and uprisings. So the US wants to undo all of Xinjiang's gains the only way they know how, with propaganda, lies, and economic warfare. They hope that by forcing all companies with supply chains in Xinjiang to prove they're innocent will lead to the loss of jobs, thereby sending the Uyghur people back into poverty. The US government knows all too well that once a group of people are struggling to eat, they're more prone to uprisings, violence, and instability. And this is how I know the US government does not care a single bit about the Uyghur people and is simply using them as a political tool to serve their own goals. Who else would fabricate elaborate claims of mass human rights abuses where they don't exist, using the misery and suffering of a group of people while at the same time pretending they care so much? Well, the US. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.